And talking about creating something, creative juices
Right.
has been created, and you've been working through that concept. What is creative juices?
I think creative juices pulls it all together. Creative juices I would consider as a mechanical, again, using our 5 basic senses, but it's also a metaphysical program designed to teach people how to think differently, teach people how to look at things in different perspectives. And the whole point about that is that if we can start to be able to really get a better idea of the things that are impacting us, the things that we're seeing visually, the things that we're taking on, then we can start to connect more pieces. And again, going to connecting more experiences that we're having, the things that we've seen, the things that we've processed through, and now we understand the operation of, with bigger opportunities, because now you can apply these things. There's a gentleman by the name of Daniel, I believe his name is Daniel Barris, and he's a technology strategist. He has a long view about technology. He'll tell you about 25 technologies that are out right now that are changing the course of the way we operate as humans. And it includes, for example, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It includes virtual reality, different types of techniques, or other technologies that are emerging, that when you start to combine your questions and your observations and your experiences with these new trends that are occurring, then you're able to combine a need or a challenge that you're dealing with again, trends of technology, opportunities that are happening. And that's the moment of opportunity itself, because that's when you're able to put things together to create something new from the experiences that you've had in the past. And you're not just creating an invention, you're creating an innovation, because you're leapfrogging. You're going bounds and finding new directions on where these things can be applied. Because the average person is just trying to take one device and turn it into something else, and it's just one step further, one step further, one step further of an invention. It's not an innovation. It's not changing the boundary or the direction of possibilities with those early creations or with those smaller creations. You know, think about this, for example. I think it was the Benz motor wagon was the first car that we have, and it was 1896. It basically was a 3-wheel device, and it had kind of like a device where you'd hold here as a tiller to direct it. And it had pedals, but it basically went around 1.9 miles per hour. So it didn't go very far, didn't go very fast, but it was the beginning. 3 years later, in 1899, you had what's called the Royal Enfield, which had the first 4-wheel device. Now, you needed to have, they say, 3 legs and 5 arms to be able to operate this thing, because it was so many different devices. But they didn't have an idea on what a car would be. There was no idea as to how do you develop a car, because it was something that had not existed before. It wasn't until 1915 with the Cadillac, and I forget the model of that Cadillac itself, where you had the steering wheel, you had the brake pedal, you had the gas, you have the current configuration that we now have in our cars today. But it took a series of cars for those things to be able to finally be worked out, and then this became the framework from which everything else builds on. Everything layers and everything builds upon something else, but you find that common idea that most people can get around, and then things build upon that. You know, 1G technology for phones. You know, that was basic, it wasn't even broadband. It was very low data communications, going up to 2G, to 3G, to 4G. Now we're in 5G. You know, I think 500,000 kilobytes of data that are being processed through that. But yet, you wouldn't have been able to come up with 5G without 4G. You wouldn't have been able to come up with 4G without 3G, because things layer, and from something comes something subsimilar. So that's how everything kind of pulls together. It's a recognition, again, of, with neuro-linguistics programming, or rather with neuro-creative programming, in creative juices, it's a recognition of neuro-linguistics programming as far as a base is concerned, or how we experience the world, but it also uses those 7 ancient principles to explain how we create within this reality. Because again, going back to the soccer example, there are rules to reality, and we can find out and understand those rules and begin to apply them. Then we can now understand the rules of neuro-linguistics programming and how we operate within our 5+ basic senses.
And as you talk through the evolution and changes that happen through experiences,
Right.
it also happens through learning things that you may not have witnessed, which happens through conversations,
Right.
legends, myths, wives' tales, the
Yeah.
passing of stories, the passing of information
Right.
verbally. What is the impact of being able to pass down information not only through experiences but verbally through sharing stories and those old tales to pass them on to the next generation?
I think they're so impactful. I think there's a lot of people, especially people who are on that existential realm. That's one of those 9 intelligences, the existentialists, the people who believe in bigger pictures, bigger understandings. And I think that a lot of people, I call them seekers, they believe that there's power in those old esoteric beliefs or ideas that were written down so long ago that they want to know more about this. They believe that in these, what they call hermetic, and hermetic means sealed, these hermetic principles that they can find an edge, they can create an edge to their life and to their existence by understanding that, because they get a better understanding of how the universe operates. Those stories, again, the whole thing about many a truth is spoken in a wives' tale. Before there was science, there was myth, there were stories, and people would capture understandings of the operations of things they saw around them in those stories, and there were oral traditions, and they would be passed on. And if you think about Alexandria, Egypt, around 100 B or AD, after the death of Christ, that common era, where you had this enormous population from all around the Middle East and Asia. You had people that had trade routes and paths down into the deepest parts of Africa, going over into Asia, where there were communications and travels taking place with the folks in India, going back to Alexander the Great. I mean, if you think about the city of Alexandria, it was a city that was started around 332 BC, when Alexander the Great went through there, decided he wanted to build this incredible city. Here was a man that was of such interest in knowledge and acquiring knowledge that everywhere he went, he worked to acquire knowledge. And when it came to that city, here's a city that was built, and it had a library that housed over 700,000 different scrolls on possibly the trade routes and the paths and the currents that had existed all throughout the Mediterranean and going down the Atlantic, or possibly the movement of the Minoans, or the formulas and mathematical calculations, even including the mathematical calculation that plotted the sun and plotted the earth around the sun, even back then. All these things they were aware of, because it was a repository of information, and the best and brightest thinkers from all around the region, all around the known world, would go to Alexandria, and they would study there under these professors that would teach these old and these ancient traditions. And there were stories that were known there even back 100 AD. One in particular that I really like, about a gentleman by the name of Hermes Trismegistus, and he was someone that was believed to have actually existed. He was believed to have been a real live person, someone though who had existed as far back as, they would say he was the Atlantean. Now, that sounds funny, it sounds strange that people think of Atlantis, you lost me right there, but if you think about the story of Atlantis, that dates back to 9,000 BC. And if you think about 9,000 years before Christ, 9,000 BC, which would have been 2,000 years before the Common Era, but if you go back that far and you think about what existed right here, at least in North America, and if you can contemplate the fact that we had ice sheets that existed above New York City that might have been 3 or 4 times the height of the Statue of Liberty, massive ice sheets that had come down as far as even into Pennsylvania and all across North America and the continent, even in Europe. And you think about, we were going through such a transition, 82,000 years of continuous snowfall and an ice age period where that ice built up. Then at the end of that, roughly 10,000 years ago, you had a thawing. You had a dramatic thawing where you had all this water on top of this ice sheet, oceans of ice, and that water was building up, and you had just deposits and deposits of millions and perhaps billions of gallons of water that burst on frequent occasions and flooded out much of North America. There's a whole area called the Scablands in North America where you see the washout that had occurred from all this volume of water pushing dirt, pushing debris, hitting its way out to the Pacific Ocean in that situation. But during that period of time, you had change that was taking place. And so when you think about it like, for example, a squeeze ball and a stress ball that we have. And if you can think about squeezing a stress ball, when you squeeze it, something's going to pop out the top. Where you're not covering that squeeze ball, the area will expand out. That was the same thing that happened when you had all that weight from all those ice sheets all around the poles itself. Everything else bulged up. When you relieve that pressure, because now that ice is melting and therefore now there's not as much weight pushing down, then that area that was there before, it starts to subside. It goes down, which means all this land that would have been on coastlines would be now 400 feet deep below sea level, which means the possibility of being able to even find an Atlantean culture and a civilization that could have existed that far back, it's gone because it's 400, 500 feet below sea level. So we isolate those things and we say that's not possible. But when you really think about the realm of possibilities, it's right there. And I say that point about the whole story there is because that's as far back as this person was supposed to have existed, Hermes Trismegistus. And he was supposed to have, when he was in a calm and conscious state, he was supposed to have been delivered a revelation of the understanding of the operations of man, our relationship to the cosmos, and the rules that exist within this reality. And the first rules, the first two most important ones, is that man exists with nature with respect to time. We have time. For example, my situation right here in this time is different from my situation 1 second later at this time. But we also have place for each one of those combinations. I work in supply chain and I think about supply chain logistics, and you may have a bottle of ketchup. It's called a SKU. It's an item, that ketchup, at a location, wherever that ketchup is. Maybe it's a distribution center, maybe it's a store. You can think of us as being SKUs. We have a time, we have our person, but we also have a place where we are at any given point in time. And so in understanding those revelations, it included 7 principles of operations of, again, how this universe operates. And going back into the whole story, if you can understand how those rules operate, then you can gain more control as to how you operate within this space and within this time period.